Good morning. We're in Hemshech Tzaddik Dalet, 5694, the year corresponding to 1933 of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And as we've been following along, this is like a parallel Hemshech to Ayin Beis, volume 2, which is actually Ayin Vov, pages 1155 through 1157. So now we're doing chapter 25 on page 115 in Tzaddik Dalet, explaining how the two deis, the two perspectives on reality, one perspective from above, one from below, is actually in the earth itself. It's not just the perspective of the creator and the perspective of the creation, but in the earth itself, in the Ayin itself, the two levels of Ayin are the two perspectives. That means not just how Atzmus sees Oir, and that Oir is Ayin, everything besides Atzmus is completely nullified. Kula kamei kalachashiv, as he said. Everything before him is like nothing. But the Oir itself, on its own, that's its whole identity. Its whole identity is Bittul. It personifies Bittul. That's the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. The Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is going to be the perspective from Das Tachten, which we haven't discussed yet. So right now, he said, and in this Eir itself, there's 4 different levels of Bittul. We learned this already in Ayin Beis, level 1. Here in Tzaddik Dalet, we're going to learn now level 1 with the Frierdiker Rebbe's additions and explanations. So, but I wanted to say a few things before we continue on, because actually a few people have written me questions. People listen to this program, either live or recorded, I'm not sure how. And I also see from some of the questions that you've asked, something I want to go over, which I've explained at length in the past, but clearly it needs to be discussed as many times as possible. It's not a simple matter. And just a few key points here. Before Chassidus Chabad, discussions about Atzmus did not exist. Meaning, even the highest levels that Kabbalah discusses never talked about Atzmus that we know of, Atzmus, the built in Mitzias Nimtza, Mitzias Atzmusei. Mention was made, but it was always essentially off limits. It was in the category where it's not something for us to be able to discuss or even interact with. It's Chassidus Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, and then especially the Rabbeim afterwards, that developed the ideas of Chassidus that brought down that we speak about Atzmus as much as we can. Even though in Torah Shalom, as I mentioned a number of times, that when you say Atzmus, it really means Atzmus Ha'oir, usually. But nevertheless, we talk about these highest levels before the Tzimtzum. As a matter of fact, in Kabbalah, you don't even have discussion about levels before the Tzimtzum. The Eitz Chaim says that Eir Ein Sof was Mamala Kol HaMetzias, Eir Ein Sof HaPoshut, and that's all we know. And then God concealed that Eir, and the Tzimtzum, and then the Kav. And so essentially from Kabbalah's point of view, the Tzimtzum, of course, was something that is a Chidush of the Arizal, even though it's hinted to earlier, but the Arizal is the one that developed the Seder Tzimtzum, the Teres Tzimtzum. Nevertheless, there's almost no discussion about anything before the Tzimtzum. You start looking a little deeper, so this shows that in the Emek HaMelech, in other places, talks about certain levels, but they're very, very limited and very few words about it. It's in Chassidus that really spoiled us, where it discusses Lifnei Tzimtzum at length, like we've been learning here, levels and so on. That's why I've been qualifying all the time that as much as you speak about it, it's never really tangible levels. It's all relatively speaking, but I don't want to go into that right now. What I wanted to explain, however, is because we've been spoiled, so to speak, so then we throw ourselves, there's an expression in Yiddish, mevartzech, which means we easily dispense and discuss these ideas as if we're like very understandable to us. The Alter Rebbe trembled when he said the word Atzilus. And between Atzilus and the Tzimtzum is tens of levels. You can imagine Lifnei Tzimtzum. The reason I'm saying this is because when we started learning Chassidus, I taught Chassidus right away was discussion about the Tzimtzum, and before the Tzimtzum, and Atzmus, and Atzmus, and Atzmus. And frankly, most people don't even understand the Shtalshalus well, let alone they're going to try to understand Atzmus. So I wanted to just say a few words here because we're talking about these high levels. And I see from the questions that we keep going back to certain same challenges, which is you're trying to understand it on terms when you don't have a full understanding of the whole picture in the first place. I don't mean to be critical. I'm just trying to point out a vital component here. And let me explain. It is true that we've learned that Atzmus is beyond everything. You can't describe Atzmus in any way. You can't call him a Moir. You can't call him a Boira. Even though even though light emerges from Atzmus and creation comes only from Atzmus. Nevertheless, you can't define Atzmus by the things that he produces, so to speak, because there's no comparison. There's nothing in common. Every producer has something in common with the production, except Atzmus, because Atzmus is a completely different reality. One that we will never fully understand because it's beyond understanding. Logic itself is a creation of Atzmus. So how could logic tell us about Atzmus? And yet, the Eibishter in some mysterious way invested in his Giluyim, meaning in his expressions, including in Seichel, a taste of him. The famous Torah that we hear from the Rebbe quotes it very often, Frierdiker Rebbe cites the name of the Alter Rebbe. Ata hareisa ladas, the first pasuk of the 17 psukim that we say before Hakofis. Ata hareisa ladas, ki Hashemu Elokim ein eid milvade. The pasuk in Veschana. And the Alter Rebbe teaches, Ata, you, do Atzmus. You Atzmus ein sof, hareisa, sich bavisen, you revealed yourself, ladas, that we should know you. We should know that Havaya is Hu Elokim, like we learned yesterday, Havaya Elokim, and ein eid milvade, nothing but you. So this is a chiddush. Atzmus did not have to reveal himself. He could have remained behind the curtain, so to speak. Obviously, it doesn't affect him one way or the other, but he didn't have to reveal himself to us. But this, among many other Teiros, Chassidus Chabad, indicates how the Eibishter Atzmus himself wanted to reveal himself by Matan Torah. And of course, La'asad Lave, like he says in Tanya, chapter 36, that we already had a taste of what? V'nigla Kved Hashem, the full revelation of the divine in this world by Matan Torah. Atares Ladas. And the Geula, it'll be full-blown, permanent. Matan Torah was temporary. It gave us the koyach now, the power to transform the world. But the permanent state of Gilui Elokus in this world, Dira B'Tachtenim, will be L'asad Lo, after Mashiach, the Geula. So this is a chiddush, that Atzmus chose to reveal himself. So let's use this pasuk. How did he choose to do that? By creating Oir, because Oir is Gilui. Had he not created Oir, as I mentioned yesterday, we would have had existence, a Tachtenim, but you wouldn't have any Gilui. You wouldn't have Haresa and Ladas. You wouldn't have any revelation. You'd have a world. Now, how could we even imagine a world without revelation is almost impossible. Because if we don't have Torah and we don't have any way to reveal godliness, so then how do we fulfill our mission? So yeah, it doesn't make any sense in the logical structure that God created. That's why he did create Oir. And Oir is Inyan. I mentioned the word awareness. I could say even more. I would say it's the creation. I use the word creation somewhat tentatively. It's not really creation because Oir usually say Hisava Sa'ir. You don't say Bria Sa'ir. But for all practical purpose, basically God chose to express light. Light is the presence of what we call divine consciousness. They'll say if there's no divine consciousness, what is there? You're right, there's nothing. There's only Atzmus. Atzmus does not need consciousness. Awareness, Gilui, revelation, even Bittul. All these words are words that are relevant to us. From Atzmus' point of view, all these words have no meaning necessarily. They have no significance. But since he chose, and we will never know why, because Nesava, a taiva, there's no kasha in a taiva. It's part of what Atzmus desired to do, and that's it. The only word we can use is Nesava, which also is not an adequate word. It's just the best word that the human language, Torah language, can find to describe something that's beyond us. So it gives, it's like a muscle of a taiva. But how did he do it? He made a process that's a very logical process. He created the concept of consciousness, created the concept of awareness, a revelation, and it goes hand in hand with bittul. Now we have an entity in existence which is not atzmus alone, but it's nothing but atzmus. All it is bittul to reveal what atzmus wants to reveal. And this is it. Now, the implications of this are very far-reaching. Let me explain. So though atzmus, from the perspective of atzmus, oir and yesh, for that matter, oir and cheshech, light and darkness are equal. Bi'acholte lahoyer, he has the capacity to radiate and illuminate. Bi'acholte shaloi lahoyer, and he has the capacity not to illuminate. And we learn these are two equal. In atzmus, to shine and not to shine are equal. In our existence, it doesn't make sense. Is it day or night? Is there light or is it dark? Can you see or can't? Are you aware or you're not aware? Imagine saying that awareness and lack of awareness of the divine is equal. From Atzma's point of view, it is equal. But that's not how he wanted it to be. He wants us to have awareness on our terms, because existence, awareness and not awareness, consciousness and non-consciousness are very relevant. It's the difference between following Torah and mitzvahs or, God forbid, following your own desires. So it's not just a small little technical matter. But that's all part of the ishtalshus of God. That's part of dira b'tachtenim. Tachtenim, by definition, means there's elyenim. Tachtenim means there's concealment and there's revelation. So from Atzma's point of view, they're equal. But then he made Oir to be a dominant feature because he wants Gilui, he doesn't want Hela. So let me quote a few things that may help understand this. The story of the Meraglim and Kairach. Let's talk about that. The Meraglim that refused and did not want to go into Eretz Yisrael because they said Eretz Eichel Sheshveh. They didn't want to enter materialism because materialism consumes its inhabitants. They wanted to stay in Ruchnius. It's a logical desire. There were Ruchnizdika people, they were spiritual people, and they didn't want to go into the challenges of the Wall Street and marketplace and all the corruption and the greed that the material world presents. What was their sin, their grave sin? No one asked you. God didn't ask you your opinion. He asked that you find out how to enter Eretz Yisrael, not whether you should enter. It's not your business. The neshama also doesn't want to come down below. That's why al karcha chatachai, God has to compel it. Why doesn't it want to come down below? Because in heaven, it's beautiful, it's warm, it's spiritual, it's light. There's no health issues, there's no corruption, there's no deceit. There's nothing of all the challenges of this world. Why would a neshama want to come to a world like this? But God says, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. This is where I want you to be. Dira b'tachtenim. So the Meraglim resisted. And their grave error was that no one asked you, no one asked your opinion on this matter. You have to just figure out how to do it, how to conquer the material world, not whether you conquer. Okay, so they were corrected, unfortunately, at a grave price. Because of that, they ended up with 40 years in the wilderness and all the other tzaras, b'chila datas that came from that. Fine. Kairach is the next parsha. So the Rebbe explains, Kairach, seeing that the Meraglim are wrong, said, you know what? We go to the other extreme. Tachtenim, only tachtenim. What do we need elyenim for? We just learned from the Meraglim that Ruchnius is not the kavanah is Gashmis. So Kairach insisted, Kola Eidik Deshimheim, Lama Tisnasu. Why did you lift yourself up? Why Moshe and Aaron superior to the rest of the nation? We're all equal. We're all equal. And what ends up happening? Interesting thing that happens. Kairach's big grave error is the Eibishter never said Elyenim and Ruchnius doesn't have a Maila. He never said the Meraglim were wrong with Ruchnius. The question is, what's the Kavanah? Obviously, Ruchnius has a Maila. The neshama doesn't want to come down. That's exactly the way it's supposed to be, because the neshama is meant to yearn for godliness. If the neshama would be too comfortable down on earth, we would cease to have the angst and the restlessness of Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, of the flickering flame. We should be in this world, but aspire to Ruchnius. Kairach said we don't need aspiring anything. Atzmus is here in Tachtenim. We don't need Elyenim. We don't need Moshe. We don't need Aaron. We don't need teachers. We don't need Giluyim. What ends up happening with Kairach? Exactly what the Meraglim had said. The earth itself that Kerach worshipped and said, this is the Kavanah, came and swallowed them up. I say them because Kerach, it says he wasn't one of them. It doesn't matter. It's not again the details. But their taina actually ended up happening. Oh, you want to worship? You think Tachtenim is the Kavanah? Yes. And you don't want Ruchnius, you don't want direction, and you don't want Giluyim. So what ends up happening is that the earth consumes you. Basically, two philosophies. One is that spirituality is superior to material, and therefore you don't want to enter the material world. Asceticism. The other philosophy is indulgence. Since Tachtenim is the Kavanah, what do we need Ruchnius for? Both are wrong. The Kavanah is the Yesh, no question. But the Yesh needs to be directed by Oir. You need Torah Oir, you need Ner Mitzvah, you need Giluyim, you need a Neshama, you need Ruchnius. So essentially, even though from Atzma's point of view, Oir and Yesh, light and dark are equal, but not from our point of view. We need direction. And therefore, Oir has a dominant role in this whole process. In Tov Mem Ches, Shabbos Pasha Dvarim, it's printed, it's a Mugadika Sikha. I had the honor to prepare it. The Rebbe speaks there that there's two ways to describe the east bank of the River Jordan. The Yidden come, after 40 years traveling through the wilderness, they come to the River Jordan. That's where Moshe Rabbeinu would pass away, and Yeshua would lead them across the river. But till they crossed, Zeis HaBracha, the end of Torah ends. There are two ways it's expressed. Sometimes it's called Me'ever HaYarden, Mizracha, which means on the east bank of the River Jordan, and sometimes it's called Ba'arvis Moav. Arvis Moav means the plains of Moav. The Moabite plains are also on the east side of the Yarden. In that Sikha, the Rebbe discusses why sometimes the pasuk uses Arvis Moav and sometimes Me'ever LeYarden. And the Rebbe brings a medrash, famous medrash. It says, Eini Yedeya be'ez mehem chafetz. The Eibishter says, God says, I don't know which one I desire, I prefer. My saying shall tzaddikim or my saying shall rishayim. The actions of tzaddikim, the actions of rishayim. It's a strange medrash. God says, I don't know which one I desire. So the commentaries discuss, he's talking, does he desire a tzaddik or a Baal Tshuva? It doesn't mean rishayim as rishayim, a Baal Tshuva. However, Chassidus goes deeper. And Chassidus says, because when you talk mitzad atzmus, there's no difference between a tzaddik and a rasha, because everything is equal. And then the medrash continues. And then he says, but then he chose, and chofetz b'maisein shel tzaddikim. He dafka wants the mice of tzaddikim. So in this sikha, the Rebbe explains, what does this mean? First of all, what's the doubt? And then he resolves it. So the answer is that mitzad atzmus, as we've been learning, yesh, everything is equal. Not because God wants rishayim chaz v'shalom. There's no such concept there. The concept of good and evil, of light and dark, of tzaddik and rasha doesn't exist. Everything is, atzmus is not in that domain altogether. But then when he chose, which means once he does create existence, he gives a preference to Oir over Cheshach. Preference to tzaddik over rasha. What's the significance of this? Going back to Kerach and the Meraglim, if everything was seen from the perspective of atzmus and not Oir, then you can make an argument, you know what? Maybe living a self-indulgent life is the ultimate kavanah, because from Atzma's point of view, what's the difference if you're a refined person or a not refined person, whether you follow Torah or not follow Torah? But once Atzmus chooses Oir is his way of expressing himself, then that becomes the only way. So there's a level where they're equal, but that same level where they're equal chooses Oir, and therefore Oir is prominent. Just to show you how far-reaching this is, in another Sikha, Vayigash, in Chelik Hey, Likud Sikha Chelik Hey, the second Sikha Vayigash, the Rebbe asks a question. The Mishnah says, Yofer Shah Achas, Shal Tshuva Maisim Tevim, Ba'elam Hazem, Kol Chai Elam Habo. 1 hour of Tshuva and Maisim Tevim, in good deeds and Tshuva, in this world is worth more than the whole world to come, the whole world to come, all Elam Haba, the whole Elam Haba, everything, all the Giluyim there. 1 hour here is Yafa. Then the Mishnah continues and says, Yafa sha'acha shel kedas ruach be'elam haba. 1 hour of pleasure in the world to come is worth more than kol chay elam haza, than all the pleasures of this world. Now it seems to be a contradiction. Which one is it? So obviously the answer is, the Rebbe Marash answers, the difference is Tainug Beira or Tainug Nivra. If you're talking about the pleasure of God, of the Creator, 1 hour in this world is worth more than all Elam Haba. Because what's Elam Haba compared to Atzmus? It's meaningless. The Alter Rebbe calls it in Tanya. It's like a descent. What is Elam Haba? Is lower than higher levels of Elikus. But Nesav HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Tainug Hashem wants, is in this world. So 1 hour in this world is more profound qualitatively than all the whole world of Elam Haba. On the other hand, if you talk about Tainug Nivra, the pleasure of the creation, obviously Elam Haba is a lot more pleasure. There's no, as I said before, there's no issues, there's no health, there's no death, there's no disease, there's no poverty. So Elam Haba obviously outweighs Elam Haza when you talk about Giluyim. So now comes the question. If that's the case, ask the Rebbe, so what is Mashiach and Geula? What role does it play exactly? From the point of view of Tainug Beira, God has more pleasure when we're in Golus and we're making a Dira B'Tachtenim and struggling than Giluyim. So what is Geula Mashiach? The only thing it seems to be is a reward to us. It's like, you know what? After you did so much work that gave me pleasure, Hashem says, now I'll give you pleasure. I'll put you into Geula, Mashiach. You'll have Elam Haba on earth, and you can have pleasure. But from my point of view, I actually had more pleasure when you were in Golus than Geula. So in other words, Geula Mashiach is only like a candy and a reward for us. What is it? Does the Eibishter also need Geula Mashiach? Obviously, the answer is yes. So the Rebbe explains and is mechadish the following, what I said earlier, that Giluyim are Negei Atzmus. It's not just for us. As long as Atzmus remains concealed in this world, yes, God has pleasure when we do the work, even though it's a concealed world. But as long as the godliness remains concealed, kavyochel, so to speak, something is not complete. Atzmus too needs expression because he chose Gilui. The Eibishter want Gilui as a maila, not a chsarn. So the idea that something should be revealed, so from the perspective of Atzmus Mamish, Gilui and Helam are equal. But that's not how the Eibishter wanted to manifest. He wants Gilui. Because Gilui has a maila, like we see. If someone says to you, I have the potential to do something, you'll say, but potential is not actual. The Alter Rebbe told one of the Chassidim who had a lot of potential, he said to him, why don't you sit down and learn? You'll be a Gaon. You'll be a tremendous scholar. And he said, Rebbe, I have the koyach to do it. I'm able to do it. Why do I have to actually do it? So the Alter Rebbe answered very sharply. He said, just like a ganef, a thief is not someone who could steal, but someone who steals. A Gaon, a great scholar, is not someone who could study, but someone who studies. So we see that something b'koyach, something of potential, is not complete. So bottom line is, the Eibishter chose Giluyim, and therefore Oyer, even though on one hand we've been learning, it's Shalei Be'erech Ta'atzmus, just like Mamish K'moy Hayesh. He said that literally. But from the perspective of what the Eibishter wants, once he reveals it, is the carrier of everything that brings godliness into this world. Without we'd have everything be concealed. To the point that you could argue that the kavanah is that we should remain in Golus Chaz v'Shalom. Or like Kairach said, this world, that's all you need. Yesh and Atzmus. No, but that's not the way it is. There's Yesh, Ayin Yesh. The Ayin changes everything. Because the Ayin is the carrier, the interface, the channel of divine energy that basically gives us the whole experience of Giluyim, of divine awareness and divine feeling, Ava, Yira, Chabad, Chagas, Nihi. It gives us the concept of Bittul. So plays not just a side role, it plays a prominent role. But here's the paradox. On one hand, is the carrier. but the yesh is still the kavanah. Kerach was right. The yesh is the kavanah. The meraglim were wrong. But the yesh without has no direction. And without the yesh does not have a kavanah. The kavanah is to bring it into this world. So the ultimate goal is the fusion of and yesh, giluyim and etzem. So I just wanted to give that whole overview, though you may have heard this from me already, because I've spoken about this more than once, at least 10 times over the years, because it's so fundamental. But I see that we keep going back to the same discussion, so I think it's important to understand what the whole role of Eir is in the first place before we go and discuss all the details. So now, with this backdrop, you can understand why it's so important to understand what Eir is. Because Eir is essentially our only hope. That's what we turn to understand what the Eibishter wants of us, Torah Eir, to look into Torah, to follow the mitzvahs and guidelines. And it also teaches us bittul. It teaches us the concept of devotion and commitment and connection to something greater than ourselves. So though the kavanah is the yesh, but the kavanah is the yesh shouldn't remain a yesh. That the yesh should become a completely bittul dika entity. Now, of course, when the yesh becomes batul, it's a true chiddush. Eir is not a chiddush. Eir doesn't have any choice. Eir is just a extension and expression of what the Eibishter wants. It's just an expression of godliness. So Eir is not the kavanah, but Eir is a vital component. It's essentially the divine instrument and the divine methodology of divine consciousness, awareness, giluyim, bittul, and everything I've been explaining. So I hope this was helpful in the whole context of things. And with that, unless somebody has a question, I'm going to continue now in Tzaddik Dalet.
Thank you very much. Without oil, we don't have the mile of yesh.
I don't know what that means, what you just said, but I'm not sure what you mean.
Without oil, the yesh cannot achieve the kavanah.
Oh, yes. But more, I would say even further. To even be megala koyach ha'atzmus in the yesh. That the yesh should know that it's coming from the yesh amiti. This word from the Alter Rebbe. That hu levade bekeche v'yecholte livre yesh ma'ayin ve'efes hamuchlat she'en lo ila v'siba acheres
Shekodmaloi.
That comes from Metziusim Atzmuse she'en lo ila v'siba acheres chaz v'shalom shekodmaloi. This itself is a gilui. That alone needs Eir. Only Eir is made. If the yesh didn't have Eir, that would remain a secret because the yesh, by definition, feels Metziusim Atzmuse. Exactly. Now, I will say one more point I want to say is that the Eir, because of its total devotion and dveikus and bittul to the moker, in this case Atzmus, will also be able to carry and channel things that are even deeper than Eir itself has. Like, for example, when let's say, here we have a good example. Avram Avinu chooses Eliezer, his Eved Eliezer Avram, to become his shliach, to bring for a star kedushin to marry off Yitzchok. So he goes, Padan Aram, and goes and he finds Rivka. So it's actually in Halach, in Sfarim it says, he actually was like the shliach for star kedushin. The Rebbe has a whole sikh about it. Now Eliezer was an Eved Avram, to the point that when he wanted to make a shidduch with Avram, Avram said, no, we're not of the same yichus. He said strong words. And yet Eliezer was able to carry and be a shliach for something that's beyond him. Why? Because bittul allows you to carry something that you yourself don't have. So due to its bittul, can be mamshich and megala, the koyach ha'atzmus in the yesh. I just wanted to add that. That's a big fundamental piece in many of the Rebbe's sichos as well. So that's another key point to remember. But nevertheless, that doesn't make Eir etzem. It means Eir due to its bittul, like we learned, kiyum mitzadatzme, because it's ultimate bittul. So then bittul changes everything. Once you have bittul, you can channel all kinds of things, even that are far, far beyond who you are, because it's not about you. All you are is a carrier of your source, or whatever is higher than you are. Okay. So let's now continue. So I'm at the bottom of page 115, and we learned that Kel Deus Havaya means In Havaya, which he said is Oyer. In Havaya itself, in Oyer, there's also two deis. Just reading where we learned yesterday. Das Ayin and Das Tachten. And what's Das Ayin? He says, well, Oyer Commission Hemshech min Atzmus Shubchinis Ayin be'etzem Husem Etzadatzme. The Oyer, not only Atzmus, Leirak Masha Atzmus Roya Oysela Ayin, not just that Atzmus sees the Oyer as Ayin, Kim Sha'er Gufu B'chinis Ayin Ba'atzme. Okay, doesn't have any tfisas mokum. Klal ba'atzme shezel ba'er mitzat teva dveka shebay deliyah she'eru dovik ba'atzme salkeinu b'chinis ayin be'etzem. Okay. That's where we stopped. The line begins ayin be'etzem. So that's now what we've established. That's what Oyer is. And it's exactly what God wanted it to be. Creating an entity, like I said, chofez b'masein shel tzaddikim. He wants Oyer. And Oyer is the way that everything comes from Oyer. Okay. V'hinei, continue. And now, Masha'eru b'chinas ayin, when we say Oyer is the level of ayin, eina kavona b'zeh shu b'chinas bitl.
Shura Mascheles.
One second. Shura Mascheles ayin be'etzem. 1 second. Something wrong here in the language. 1 second. Let me see. I want to just see Ayin Beis a second. It's around 9 lines from the bottom on page 115. 1 second, please. The Frierdiker Rebbe adds a line, but I'm not sure what he means by this. Hine masha'erhu b'chinas ayin. Eina kavona b'zeh shu b'chinas bitl?
I don't know. Maybe it said Ayin and Ain. Maybe it's a repetition of the second Ain. Maybe should not be there. Again,
yeah, maybe that's
because maybe the map is made twice. Ayin.
That's
because
possible.
It's the opposite. I don't know.
The problem is
he explains himself as he goes on.
No. The thing is, in Ayin Beis, he doesn't have this line. In the Ayin Beis, it goes like this. It says like this. Alkeinu b'chinas ayin be'etzem. V'hine masha'eru b'chinas ayin yesh lahovim b'kama yifanim b'inyan habitl. The Frierdiker Rebbe adds a line. I'm not even sure why he's adding a line. V'hine masha'eru b'chinas ayin.
Hakavona b'zeh shehu b'chinas bitl. I don't know.
Hold on. It's for sure not eina kavana b'zeh, because the kavana is bitly. He says clearly, so you can't say eina kavana. 1 second. Just give me a minute. I'm not sure. The whole line to me, I don't understand why he's even adding this line.
But if you're taking out the ayin, it makes sense, no?
Yeah, but as you know, I try to avoid making a correction, especially the Rebbe. The Rebbe corrects constantly when he thinks his language is not correct. So what, the Rebbe missed it? You see, a few times he writes, Tos Hamaitik, Ulai Tzarech Liyas. That's why I'm hesitant. Look on page 113. The Rebbe writes, Chenu ba'atoke, ukenire shu Tos Hamaitik. So here, the Rebbe doesn't write it. So what happened later? That's why I'm hesitant to just jump. My feeling is that this line is a repeat from another line that's similar. Sometimes they type a line twice. That's what I think something. Because what it should say based on Ayin Beis, it should say, V'hine, ma'she'eru b'chinas Ayin, hine bit. It's correct. If you take out the second Ayin, it makes sense. I'm just saying why I'm hesitant. So for all practical purposes, I'll look more into it. But for right now, there's no question he's saying that Ayin means bittul. You can't say it means Eina kavana b'zeh habittul. Shebchinas bittul. That wouldn't make sense. So basically, Ine masha'eru b'chinas Ayin. I'll skip the second Ayin. We'll go with your approach, even though I still want to look into it more. Hakavana b'zeh shebchinas bittul. Hine bittul zeh. This bittul of the Ayin of Oyer, that Oyer does not feel any, it's completely nullified. He says in this bittul yesh levayir, you can explain ulahovin and understand become efanim, be'efan habittul. In the number of ways we can understand this bittul, and as I said, in Ayin Beis he enumerates 4 different ways. In Tzaddik Dalet he only ends by the third one because the Hemshech never was concluded. So we're going to learn now the first eifin, which is called Hedet Tfisas Makom, and we already learned it in Ayin Beis. Okay. I know what the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe wants to add that Ayin means bittul. Unless he means Ayin. Ayin. Like the 2 levels of Ayin. No, it doesn't read right.
No.
Okay, fine. Good. So we can understand it become efanim be'efana bittul. So what we're going to do now, after my longer introduction, it makes total sense because he's going to teach us now what is bittul. And remember the yesh, meaning us, we need instruction what bittul is because it doesn't come naturally. We have to work on it. So he's going to explain 4 levels of bittul in the Oyer, and as I said, from the bottom up, a lower level, a higher level, a deeper level. Okay.
Maybe what he's saying is, Eina kavona b'zeh bittul. The regular bittul was we always use bittul, so it's not the regular bittul what always we talk about it. This is a different bittul. There's 2 types of bittul here. He's going to take bittul apart.
The problem is then is missing words. It's not clear then.
It's missing the word bittul ragil.
I don't think it's what he means, especially when you look at Ayin Beis. I don't think he's just saying that's not the regular bittul because who says what's regular bittul? Maybe this is bittul. I wouldn't touch it like that. Because then he should have said, Eina kavana b'zeh b'chinas bittul. He should have said, Ella bittul zeh yesh levayir. He shouldn't say hine. Anyway, I don't think that's a pshat. But let's continue. I'll look over it again. I have to look into it. Maybe, not sure what he means here. As I said, the best way, the easiest is to take out 1 ayin. But I don't want to do that. So I have to figure out another way to understand it. So we'll see. So, okay, so let's continue now. Ha'echad, ha'alef. And just if you're keeping count, if you want to keep record, Aleph will go until the end of this mimer, which means until page 121. And the Eifan HaBeis, the second Eifan, will be the next mimer in Tzaddik Dalet, that is. Page 137, just for the record. So here we go. Now again, we learned this in Ayin Beis, but here's going to be a lot more elaboration. What is this first level of bittul? Now remember, it's head that tfisas makom. She'efan bittul shala'er. The manner of this bittul of the Eir, who be'efan headed tfisas makom. That's the type of bittul it is. So categorizing it, headed tfisas makom, it means it does not have any standing, does not sense any sense of standing, of value. V'hu, and this means the liyah she'eru b'chinas dveikus b'mekedei, being that the Eir is in a state of attachment to its source. Eir is always dovik b'moyer. That's a rule. Eir is not able to exist if it's not connected to a source. Like to say sunlight without a sun doesn't make sense. To say a candlelight without a candle. Every light has to have a connection to its source. Now, it could be a cloudy day, but doesn't mean Eir is not connected. It just means the clouds are blocking the flow. But Eir is always connected. You disconnect Eir from its source, the Eir ceases to be. So that's not the case with Yesh Miyesh or Ilav Olol. Tafka Eir and Moir are that way. So Eir by nature is Dovik b'Moir, so due to its Dvekas b'Mkere. Hare Nirgish by Mekere. So it's 2 points here. The connection, its attachment to its source means Hare Nirgish. That means it feels its source. Because it doesn't make any sense. Something is connected to something and doesn't feel it. If you're not connected, of course you don't feel the source. You may surmise, you can figure it out. Or like we spoke about the
Give me an example for not connected.
Water from a faucet. And anything. The seichel, an idea from a teacher to a student. Once the teacher is gone, the student has the idea. Almost everything, by the way, is not like Oyer. Oyer is a unique property. Everything in existence, you cut off a piece of wood from a tree. It's not connected to the tree. It may still have a relationship. It's still wood, but it's not dependent on the tree. You can build a table. The tree could be long gone, and you have a table that lasts forever. Oyer, that's not shaykh to that. So dvekus, he equates dvekus with hergish. That since it's connected to the source, it feels its source. This itself, that the Eir is attached
to, does not mean feels, but it feels in it. Not that the oil itself feels. The oil, I don't know if the oil feels, but it nirgash boy.
Even if you say the words, the mocker is felt within it.
Yeah,
that's more accurate. The mocker is, the source is felt within the Eir. This itself, that the Eir is attached and within it is felt, its source, mizbatel ba'atzmei b'bchinas. He says clearly, mizbatel ba'atzmei. He's clearly talking about Eir as an entity. It's mizbatel ba'atzmei. It becomes nullified within itself. B'bchinas hedet fisas mokim ba'atzmei. In a state of lack of any standing, lack of any inherent, lack of any self-contained value in itself, because it is completely nullified due to its attachment and the sensing of the source within it. Ukanal, like we learned earlier, the Rebbe says here in the footnote, Perek Vov, chapter 6, the Begilui Eiris, in the revelations of Eir, of the lights, of the energies, Harimadrega Achas, Mizbatelas Legabe Eir Naili Yeser. One level, in other words, when Eir revealed and it comes into levels, one level is nullified compared to a higher level of light. That's the rule. We're back in chapter 6, that's a long way back. I'm just looking here to see what it says. Oh, with Al-Matata. Okay, good. This is the Friedrich Rebbe's edition here. Good. Now he's going to give examples for this. Remember, we learned this in Ayin Beis already. Nothing new yet. There's a few new lines that explain it, but the same idea. Ukamaimer, and now he brings Kamaimer like the statement, Kisrei law, the supernal keser, the keser above. Afal gav, the EU kadmen tzach mitzuchtzach. So the Ayin Beis didn't bring the whole description. Here he says, even though keser elyon is a very high level, it's a kadmen, a primordial light, tzach, mitzuchtzach. 3 different expressions to show how lofty it is. Tzach, mitzuchtzach means very pure, very refined, very edel. Nevertheless, uchamhu It's darkened. Ucham is dark, is black. Kodam ilus ha'ilus. In the presence, as it stands, kodam, before the cause of all causes. So on its own level, Keser is a kadmen, a tzach, a mitzuchzach, a very high level of But in the presence, or when you compare it, and it stands before the source of all sources, which is just the name of a level that's higher than Keser, the source of it all, it's Ucham. What's Ucham? The Pirush Ucham, who's Shachrus. Ucham means darkened, darkness. Ukamoy Shcheres Ke'erev. That their dark hair, like the hair of like the darkness of like black, like a black raven. So it's an expression, I think, in Shir HaShirim, that the hair was black like a raven. So black, dark, black. How could you say on a light, which is never compare, you never call a light dark light, black light. Light is light. Light illuminates. It's more compared to white, to brightness. But because Keser is standing kodam to a source of all causes, it's blackened in the face or in the presence or as before the cause of all causes. And now the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to explain, this is not in Ayin Beis. Frierdiker Rebbe's explanation on the word shachar or ucham. The kashem shebegvonim, just as it is in colors, hari govern shachar, the color dark, the color black, who hepech halovan, is the antithesis, the opposite, diametric opposite of white, black, white. Kumoy kain hari hashachrus hu hepech ha'er. The same thing, shachrus, darkness, is the opposite of light. So just like black is the opposite of white, darkness is the opposite of light. The zeu, and this is the meaning when it says kisrei lo ucham. Ucham hu the loizul b'vacha ena er. Not only that it's not er, it's not just the absence of light. Kim shu eid hepecha er. Next page, page 116. But furthermore, it's actually called the opposite of light. You could say that when Keser stands before Ilus, before the cause of all causes, it's not shining because it's completely bottled. But to call it Ucham is much stronger. You're saying it's actually dark. It's actually opposite of light. It's even a stronger bittel. The Oyer hu Gili. Oyer is revelation. V'ucham pirusha de be'erech Ilus ha'ilus. And when you say dark, pirusha, it means that be'erech, in contrast to the Ilus ha'ilus, the cause of causes, eine inyan ha'gili klal. It's not gili at all. So it's one thing saying it's not light. It's another thing saying it's actually dark, opposite of light. Can you imagine the bittel of that? So as I said again, you could say something is nullified as if it's non-existent in the presence of something greater. But to say that it's actually a force that is darkens, that goes against light, that's really saying it's really very far apart, because not only is it not light, it's the opposite of light. That's what the Frierdiker Rebbe adds here. So it also understands. It doesn't say, it could have said like this, that Keser Elyon, Kisrei Law, even though it's a great light, but it's Eina Meir, Kodam Ilasel. It doesn't, the light is insignificant. But he says, Ucham, it's dark. Okay. Ukamaimer, and this is back to Ayin Beis, brings the next statement. Kol Nuhuroyin,
Dark in comparison?
Kashchoyin Kameh. All the lights, Mischashchoyin Cheshach, again the word darkness. All the lights get darkened Kameh before him. Not just lack of light, but darkened. The Eina Pirushem Cheshach Mamish. This does not mean actual darkness. Because if it was actual darkness, it would be dark all the time. Remember, we're talking about an entity that has light in its own space, in its own domain. It's only in the presence, kameh, before him, or before Ilus Ilus, that it gets dark. We're not talking about the color black. Color black is black no matter what. It's an objective blackness. We're talking about something that gets blackened or darkened in the presence of something greater than it. El shazel dugmas dover kamei b'yem v'layla shem er v'cheshach. It's an example Like, for example, we say day and night. Shem er v'cheshech. They're light and dark. Lichtig and finster. In Yiddish, lichtig and finster means bright and dark. Hariyacheshech hu hepech ha'er. When we say that, cheshech, darkness, the darkness of night, is the opposite of light. She says, Kenu ba'atayir oir. Same thing with the Torah, shuhu gilui. The Torah, the description of when you say oir, just like when you say yom and laila, and vayikol le'er yom and the cheshech kara laila, so you say yom and laila is like oir and cheshech, the opposite of light. The same thing when you talk description of light. What's the opposite of light? Shu gilui. Ucham hu hafache. The word ucham is the opposite of gilui, of air, which is gilui. Kalemer she'eina me'inyan hagilui klal. It means that it's not at all the gather of gilui. We're not just talking about two colors. One is red, blue, green, black, and white. We're talking about an actual opposite. One is gilui, revelation, and the other is the opposite of revelation.
But the word shachar, dark, also means shachar, morning, light, day.
Actually, does not. When we say
That's
when you say
Shachoyer.
alois hashachar, what means alois hashachar?
Shachar in the morning.
Shachar, the darkness of the night rises. Means goes back, and the day begins. So shachar actually does not. When we say shachris and shachar, it really means that the darkness of the night has left, and therefore the morning comes.
Not always.
The word for morning.
Alois Shachar means that the dawn, the beginning of the light. But
no, Alois Shachar says Zohar means Alois means Aliyah, that the darkness of the night goes up, and the light of the day begins.
Wow, that's a Zohar.
That's a Zohar, befedish.
But the pshat from Alois Shachar, there is a star that is the beginning of the morning. But even though the question that you ask, Shacharus is not Shachar. Shacharus is Shochoyer, which is darkness. It's two different things.
Same word.
No,
Shochoyer and Shachar are not, I think that they are not the same Shirish.
in Zohar it says befedish what I just said. He asked the question actually, because he speaks about it's Pasha Vayishlach. Vayovik ish imei, what does the pasuk say? Ad alois hashachar. So the Zohar says, why alois hashachar? What's alois? Should be Yeridus hashachar. The dawn breaks, the dawn comes down, it doesn't go up. So it says alois hashachar because the darkness goes up, and then the Boker is the name for morning, not shachar. Boker ve'erev, erev ve'boker. But anyway, regardless, what we're speaking here for sure, he's talking about shachar as darkness. There's no question about that.
Ucham,
and he said, Shcheres ke'erev. A raven is dark, a raven is black. Okay, 1 second here. I think we'll stop here because it's going to get more complicated. The point that he's going here, what he's adding, it doesn't say in Ayin Beis, he's explaining that the bittul is not just that it's lack of light, but it's actually a state of the opposite of light. So in other words, a lower level of light compared to the higher is not just lower and not light, it's actually a dark state. But we'll learn it more tomorrow, more in detail. I don't want to go now further into it because it's this whole page till the top of the next page is all an addition from the Frierdiker Rebbe over Ayin Beis. So this is a whole Esof the Frierdiker Rebbe adds. So we'll stop here, top of page 116, and we'll continue tomorrow.